I love talking to people. I'm a natural communicator and public speaker, and I take great pride in addressing audiences about things that I'm passionate about. And one of those things that I'm passionate about happens to be uncommon connections, these moments in our lives that are seemingly impossible, unexplainable, and unavoidable. In a way, my ability to talk to you today, my ability to be up here presenting and giving this talk, is in and of itself an uncommon connection. But we'll get to why that's the case in a little bit. Scientists and mathematicians have spent a really long time trying to calculate these uncommon connections, the unpredictable, the unavoidable. And they've gotten really good at it. One theorem, Bayes' theorem, postulates that everything in our lives has a calculable possibility. Using a formula, the theorem predicts that everything, no matter how impossible or small, could not have been impossible. Another, Littlewood's law, explains that everyone in their lives experiences events with the likelihood of 1 in a million at a rate of about once a month. Think about that for a second. Think about everything that you went through last month or last year. According to Littlewood and Bayes, at least one thing, one occurrence, was an uncommon connection. Now, these might be hard to speculate in our own lives, but they're really all around us. For example, the odds of you being born with your own attributes and self and qualities was 1 in 400 trillion. The chances of you winning the lottery, 1 in 14 million. The chances of a city-destroying asteroid hitting us right now, 0.1%. Which is actually more likely than either of those other two things. We all encounter experiences, occurrences, or events that feel like they were made just for us, like they were supposed to happen. And we're often correct in believing that. But there are also a lot of statistic-less-based examples as well. Meeting someone who changes your outcome in life. Having something occur that derails your life plans and forces you to pursue other options, often for the better. Even the most simple things, such as having conversations that you didn't expect to. It sounds kind of meta, but we've all experienced these type of occurrences, whether we'd like to admit it or not. Now, I'm not trying to go all miracle believer on you. It's not so much miracles as it is science. And one thing about me is that I love science. I grew up in a family of engineers, so science and math were always a topic of conversation in my household. I think it's science's predictability and definiteness that I like the most. I love equations and numbers. I love experience and outcome. I love statistics and probability. But oftentimes, many people find that their 1 in a million moments are born out of science's faults, out of medical shortcomings, out of healthcare's inabilities. The group that I'm talking about in particular are women. Specifically, women who are diagnosed late in life with autism. Now you might be thinking, that took a turn. Just hear me out. The Autism Network articulates that around 42% of women with autism will first be diagnosed with something else before being diagnosed with autism. Think about that. Half of women with autism will go through their childhood and parts of their adult lives without ever receiving the correct diagnosis. And statistics on this further. Around 8% of girls with autism are diagnosed before age 6, compared with 25% of boys, the other 75% of which will likely be diagnosed before they reach double digits. If you're like me, you're probably wondering, how is this possible? How in 2021 is healthcare still failing us? The Journal of Neuroscience Research provides some answers to this. You see, when studying autism, brain scans and brain imaging become really important. However, for every 8 male brains that are scanned, only 1 woman's brain is. And as a result, experts argue the newest official criteria for diagnosing autism in the Diagnostic Statistics Manual usually includes criteria only geared towards diagnosing men, not women. But it's not necessarily neuroscientists' fault. If women aren't diagnosed, how could they possibly be researched? This creates a type of cyclical nature. Women aren't diagnosed, they're not researched, which furthers diagnosis, which leads to lack of research. It seems the only way to break this cyclical nature is big changes in healthcare, the autism community, and the general population. Now, clearly, I'm very passionate about this topic. Last April, I placed 5th at the National Forensics Association tournament with a speech on my research about it. But the reason I'm so passionate is because I'm a part of the aforementioned 42% of women. Earlier, I told you that my ability to be up here speaking and giving this talk was an uncommon connection. And the reason for that is because I'm autistic. Let me tell you just a little bit of my story. In fall 2020, I had had enough. I was so tired of how difficult my life was and how out of place I seemed. I tend to hyper-focus on details. I have sensory overload issues. I don't pick up on social cues, and oftentimes I feel like everyone around me has been given the script of life. Like I was the stage manager suddenly forced on stage to play the lead in a show I don't know the lines to. Everyone else knows what to say and where to go, and I'm flying by the seat of my pants. As I said earlier, I love science, so I immediately took to researching. And I came across an article with people describing their experiences that sounded a lot like me. One person they quoted in particular said, "I finally found why I felt like an alien for so long. Finally, I can stop feeling bad about being different." The chances of me coming across this article were very slim. It was like 6 pages into my Google search and published in a different country. But somehow, I did. The article went on to describe people who had been diagnosed ages 26 to 54. And at first I was in kind of a little bit of denial. I thought, if I had autism, my parents, my pediatrician, my doctor would have picked up on that, right? But I kept reading and realized this sounded a lot like me. So I talked with a specialist in the area. And after chatting with her for a while, she was able to get me into her clinic almost immediately. The odds of that happening were pretty small. The clinic she works for often has a months-long waiting list. It's impossible to get an appointment. But on that day in particular, she had an opening, and I was able to get in. In November 2020, I was formally diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. I remember my psychiatrist saying it was so rare for this type of diagnosis to happen. She called me, quote, "the poster child for women with autism," which I think is a compliment. My initial reaction should have been anger, sadness, even a sense of loss. But instead, my reaction was, how can I make sure that this stops happening to people like me? How can I help women to avoid the struggles I went through? Somehow, in that moment, my reaction was exactly what I needed it to be. Every step of my journey, I encountered these rare occurrences, these uncommon connections. Every step of my journey, I fulfilled those laws about statistics and probability. That has what led me to what my current passion is, which is speaking about women and autism. I advocate in ways exactly like this, speaking to audiences, as well as hosting events and correcting the record about autism. I've had the chance to speak with dozens of people across the country who went through things exactly like me. And we've shared our stories, sought advice, and given each other information, which is a pretty uncommon connection if you ask me. But it's also led me to realize that we need to take these 1 in a million moments in our lives and do something with them. For hundreds of thousands of women, this diagnosis is unlikely to happen. But us being complacent in that does nothing. Now, I'm not going to stand up here and ask you guys to become the brilliant doctors and scientists who further research on autism. That would be quite the ask. So instead, I'm going to challenge you to do something a little different. Everyone sitting in this room has an uncommon connection like the one I've just described. Maybe it's meeting a friend who changes your life. Maybe it's a life-altering diagnosis or event. Maybe it's as minute as the route you chose to get here, the schedule you laid out for the day, or the classes you picked this semester. My ask of you is to take these uncommon connections and make something with them. For some, this might seem less obvious than others, but for example, I have dedicated my life and my future to speaking out about this topic. I encourage everyone in this room who has an uncommon connection or will have one to do the same. Use it as a medium of appreciation. Appreciation of yourself, your choices, and the world. You're about to hear from speakers who will talk on just this sense of appreciation for who we are and what we've been through. Use their talks as a starting point, as direction. My diagnosis has changed my outlook on life. It has changed how I see myself and my place in the world. It was unlikely to happen, and it could have never happened. I challenge each and every one of you to make some of these connections a little more common. Maybe that involves becoming the autism researcher who vouches for women. Maybe that involves simply speaking up in group settings about things that you believe in order to correct the record. Maybe that involves going to law school to fight for disability rights across the country and beyond. It is imperative that we stop looking at our lives not in terms of what we currently have, but in terms of the possibilities of the future. Now, I couldn't leave you today without providing some resources. This QR code will take you to a Google folder that has 2 documents. One provides information for those of you who have been diagnosed with autism or think you could be, ways to get those next steps and resources. The other provides ways to spot autism early in women, specifically children, and ways that you can get these children the help that they need. My outlook, my diagnosis, my life could have been a lot different. My ability to speak up today could have never happened. I hope today that my talk for you was in and of itself an uncommon connection, something that was unlikely to occur, but that impacted you nonetheless. Thank you.